Western Spring Television. Ours it is.
Good evening and welcome to Spring Global and Western Spring Television. Now the headlines. Court issues order restraining National Chairman of Labour Party Julius Abure and 3 others from parading themselves as national officials of the party. Outside Nigeria, a Taliban order has barred Afghan women from working for the United Nations. Israeli police have clashed with Palestinian worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied East Jerusalem. Good evening. My name is Femi Olanikpeku. Now the news in detail. A Federal Capital Territory High Court has issued an order restraining the National Chairman of the Labour Party, Julius Abure, National Secretary Farouk Ibrahim, and 2 others from parading themselves as national officers of the party. Others stopped from parading themselves as national officers are the National Organizing Secretary, Clement Ojukwu, and the Treasurer, Oluchi Okpara. Justice Hamza Moazu issued the restraining order while ruling in ex parte application argued by James Onoja. In an application, Onoja told the court how the restrained national officers allegedly forged several documents of the FCT High Court to carry out unlawful substitutions in the last general elections. Onoja adds that following their indictment by police investigation, the 4 people are to be arraigned in court, adding that warrants for their arrest have already been obtained. Meanwhile, the Rivers State Executive Committee of the All Progressives Congress, APC, has suspended the party's chairman, Emeka Beke, and the national and the legal advisor, Iheanyi Chukwu Azubike, over alleged anti-party activities and financial misconduct. Also, the State Executive Committee dissociated itself from the comments allegedly made by the former Minister of Transportation, Rotimi Amechi, that the President-elect Bola Tinubu single-handedly nominated Mahmoud Yakubu as the Independent National Electoral Commission chairman. A special leader of the party's executive committee in the state, Chike Enyinda, who led other members to a media briefing in Port Harcourt, disclosed this today. Enyinda noted that the activities of Beke and Amechi had adversely affected the party in the last couple of years, culminating in its dismal outing in the just concluded general election. He further alleged that Amechi's earlier instruction backfired on the APC during the March 18th governorship election, as no contrary instruction was given to the party supporters in the various local government areas to counter the earlier instructions. President Muhammadu Buhari has approved a 320 billion naira state 2023 intervention funds for public tertiary education institutions in the country. The Executive Secretary of Tertiary Education Trust Fund, Sonny Echono, disclosed these in Abuja today during the fund's annual strategic planning workshop with all heads of beneficiary institutions. Echono said a meeting was an avenue to receive feedback and evaluate the performance of its intervention lines to enhance a more robust delivery of the agency's mandate. According to the TED Fund boss, the 2023 intervention cycle will see each university receiving about 1.1 billion naira, polytechnics about 700 million naira, while each college of education would get about 800 million naira. Echono further said the fortunes of the Nigerian tertiary education sector have improved significantly under Buhari's administration, saying that between 2015 till date, a total sum of 1.702 trillion naira has been disbursed as education tax collection to public universities, polytechnics, and colleges of education, compared to a total sum of 1.249 trillion naira disbursed from inception of the fund in 1993 up to 2014. And the federal government has declared Friday 7th and Monday 10th April 2023 as public holidays to mark this year's Easter celebration. The Minister of Interior, Rauf Aregbesola, made the declaration in Abuja. Aregbesola, in a statement signed by the ministry's permanent secretary, Shuaib Balgore, today urged Christians to emulate the virtues of sacrifice, togetherness, forgiveness, love, peace, among other virtues of Jesus Christ. The minister called on Christians and all Nigerians to use the occasion of this year's Easter celebration to pray for an end to the security challenges in parts of the country. The minister assured that the federal government is doing all that is necessary to ensure a peaceful transition of government following the peaceful conduct of elections. And outside Nigeria, a Taliban order has barred Afghan women from working for the United Nations. The UN has told its Afghan staff, men and women, not to report to work for 48 hours until it has clarity on the matter in meetings with the Taliban. There has been an increasing clampdown on women's freedoms since the Taliban seized power in Afghanistan in 2021. The UN has, however, called the Taliban order unacceptable and frankly inconceivable. Foreign female workers are exempted from the ban, but if implemented, these would be the most significant test of the future of UN operations in Afghanistan and the relationship between the organization and the Taliban government. In the Middle East, Israeli police have clashed with Palestinian worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied East Jerusalem. Police said 350 people were arrested in a pre-dawn raid after what they called agitators with fireworks, sticks, and stones shot themselves inside. Palestinians said stun grenades and rubber bullets were used to clear out the group and that 14 people were hurt. Militants in the Gaza Strip later fired rockets at Israel, and its military carried out airstrikes in response. The latest violence comes just ahead of an overlap between the Islamic holy month of Ramadan and the Jewish Passover holiday. In the United States, former U.S. President Donald Trump has said the U.S. is going to hell in a defiant address after pleading not guilty to falsifying business records to hide damaging information ahead of the 2016 election. The former president was charged with 34 counts in a Manhattan court in New York yesterday. These relate to a hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels, who says they had an affair. Mr. Trump is the first U.S. president in history to face a criminal trial. He said the case was simply part of a Democratic conspiracy to interfere with next year's presidential election in which he is running.
And I never thought anything like this could happen in America. Never thought it could happen. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it. This fake case was brought only to interfere with the upcoming 2024 election, and it should be dropped immediately. They attacked me with an onslaught of fraudulent investigations. Russia, Russia, Russia. Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. Impeachment hoax number one. Impeachment hoax number 2, the illegal and unconstitutional raid on Mar-a-Lago right here. But now they have really stepped up their efforts by indicting the 45th President of the United States, who received 75 million votes, which is more than any sitting president in the history of our country.
Elsewhere, French judges have ordered 3 senior members of the Syrian regime of President Bashar al-Assad to stand trial for collusion and crimes against humanity over the deaths of 2 French Syrian men. The order, signed last Wednesday, says the 3 senior al-Assad advisors are charged with complicity in crimes against humanity and war crimes. Meanwhile, France has issued international arrest warrants for the 3. The trial will be the first in France related to the Syrian regime, but not the first in Europe, where Syrian refugees have drawn on the principle of universal jurisdiction to bring suspected war criminals to court. French prosecutors believe the trio, who are not expected to show up for the trial or have lawyers represent them, are responsible for the deaths of 2 French Syrian men, Mazin Dabak and his son Patrick, who were arrested in 2013. And as French President Emmanuel Macron and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen meet President Xi Jinping, they will be sending a message of unity, even as China seeks to exploit potential cracks in Europe's alliances. The French president and the head of the European Commission will be welcomed by the Chinese president in Beijing tomorrow. The joint trip is the latest in a noticeable push from European leaders to engage with China, which has seen German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez paying visits in recent months. Mr. Macron and Ms. von der Leyen will be pressing Mr. Xi on taking further steps to halt the Ukraine war, while also financing the increasingly fraught trade relationship between the European Union and China, its biggest trading partner. You're watching Spring Global on Western Spring Television. We'll be right back after this break.
The 1914 Amalgamation Treaty is synonymous to the birth of Nigeria. Frederick Lugard, a British Army captain and an outlaw who struck gold in Africa, became the instrument used by destiny to make it happen. The amalgamation of Nigeria was designed for economic reasons by the colonial administration to offset Northern Protectorate budget deficit by Southern Protectorate surplus returns. The amalgamation had ab initio created imbalance in the economic political structure of Nigeria and was responsible for the persistent hiccups and the efforts to forge a united country till today. Nigeria's amalgamation was labeled as the mistake of 1914 by native northern conservatives who neither wanted it nor contributed anything significant to its sustenance. Western Spring Television identifies with Amalgamation Treaty of 1914 as a watershed event in history. It was a Euro-American trade in slaves by which 12.5 million Africans were captured from their indigenous homelands and transported via the Atlantic to Europe and the Americas. The transatlantic slave, also known as triangular trade, was the worst form of man's inhumanity to man and the most costly in human life of all long-distance global migrations. Hundreds of Africans chained tightly to plank beds in the belly of slave ships in horrific conditions were transported via the Atlantic and stripped of all human dignity on arrival in Europe and America. It is the greatest crime the Caucasians committed against the black race. It is impossible to discuss the transatlantic slave trade without a copious reference to impoverishment and underdevelopment of Africa and its peoples. The triangular trade left the continent in ruins. Western Spring Television identifies transatlantic slave trade as a watershed event in history.
Thank you for staying with us. A judge has ordered 3 Mexican immigration officials, a private security guard, and a Venezuelan migrant be held for investigation in connection with a fire at an immigration detention center in northern Mexico that killed 40 migrants and refugees. Mexico's Federal Judiciary Council said after yesterday's hearing that the 4 people responsible for security at the facility will be held on charges of homicide by omission and causing injuries. The migrants who allegedly set the fire faces charges of homicide and causing injuries. A video from a security camera inside the facility shows guards walking away when the fire started last Monday inside a cell holding migrants and refugees and not making any attempt to release them. It was not clear whether those guards had keys to the cell doors. However, more than 24 migrants and refugees were seriously injured in the fire. In the meantime, the United States has flown nuclear-capable B-52 bombers to the Korean Peninsula in a show of strength against North Korea as concerns grow that Pyongyang might conduct a nuclear test. South Korea's Ministry of National Defense said the long-range bombers took part in a joint aerial drills with US and South Korean fighter jets over the Korean Peninsula. Today's deployment was the first of US B-52 bombers to the peninsula in a month. The South Korean and US militaries have been expanding their combined military drills in response to North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. Last month, the Allies conducted their biggest field exercises in 5 years, as well as computer simulations for command post training. The US also sent nuclear-powered USS Nimitz aircraft carrier for naval training with South Korea last week and US-South Korea-Japan anti-submarine drills this week. Moving on, Iran has appointed a new ambassador to the United Arab Emirates shortly ahead of an expected meeting of foreign ministers of Iran and Saudi Arabia in China. Iranian state media confirmed that the foreign ministry has selected Reza Ameri as the new envoy to the UAE after a gap of over 7 years. Ameri was reportedly the director of the expatriates office of the foreign ministry and a former ambassador to Algeria, Sudan, and Eritrea. The UAE, which has a long history of economic ties with Iran, had downgraded diplomatic relations with Tehran after Saudi Arabia closed its diplomatic missions in 2016 and demonstrators attacked them following the execution of a prominent Shia leader by the Sunni majority kingdom. But the Saudi ally has increasingly re-engaged Iran in the past few years and appointed an ambassador to Tehran last year. Iran's move to appoint a UAE envoy came 2 days before an expected meeting between Iranian foreign minister and his Saudi counterpart, Faisal bin Farhan, in Beijing tomorrow. And here in Africa, South Africa's government has revoked a national state of disaster declared in February to manage a crippling electricity crisis. On February 9th, President Cyril Ramaphosa invoked disaster regulations to fight the crisis that included daily rolling power cuts by state utility Eskom due to frequent breakdowns at its aging coal-fired power stations and years of corruption. A state of disaster gave the government additional powers to respond to the crisis, including by permitting emergency procurement procedures with fewer bureaucratic delays and less oversight. Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister Thembi Nkadimeng said in a statement today that the government will now work through its Energy Crisis Committee to reduce the effect of power cuts using existing legislation and contingency arrangements. The government said it decided to terminate the disaster regulations in view of those developments. Elsewhere, the Debt Management Office DMO says Nigeria's debt stock is increasing due to a combination of several factors, including borrowings and continued issuing of promissory notes by the federal government. Director General of the DMO, Patience Oniha, spoke on the country's swelling public debt profile in an interview today. Addressing the country's total debt, Oniha said several loans have been contracted from multilateral and bilaterals, while the federal government keeps issuing promissory notes to settle obligations for which it does not really have revenue. Oniha said although borrowing is an accepted form to fund government activities, there should be revenues generated to support such. She also said a 77 trillion naira debt projection likely to be inherited before the end of the current administration can be surmounted with incentives that need to be put in place to ensure borrowings equal balanced expenditure and sustained revenue. And some sports stories. The Ondo State government has expressed its readiness to sell the state-owned football clubs, the Sunshine Stars and Sunshine Queens, both of Akure. While Sunshine FC are currently playing in the Nigeria Professional Football League, the Sunshine Queens are playing in the second division of Nigeria Women Professional Football League. The State Commissioner for Youth and Sports Development, Bamidele Ologunloluwa, who disclosed these in an interview, said the state-owned football teams were open for sale or privatization to the right investors by the end of the ongoing 2022-2023 league season. The commissioner noted that the clubs needed to be privatized for proper administration, adding that it may lead to the government handing off the clubs completely or partnering with investors. According to him, if a bigger organization showed interest in buying the clubs, it will be sold immediately. Alexander Ceferin was re-elected unopposed for a third term as president of UEFA at a meeting of European football's governing body in Lisbon today. The 55-year-old Slovenian lawyer, first elected in 2016 following the downfall of Frenchman Michel Platini, will remain in the role until 2027. The UEFA Congress came just a few weeks after Gianni Infantino was re-elected as president of the sports world governing body FIFA, also unopposed. Ceferin recently successfully opposed proposals by Infantino to hold the World Cup every 2 years, and his re-election by acclamation comes after he also fought off the breakaway European Super League project during his second term. It will now oversee the introduction of a new format for the Champions League starting next year.
That we have a duty to ensure that the interests of football prevail over the private interests of a handful of privileged individuals. I'm not going to go into the details of the ill-fated plan put forward by the three clubs officials, 2 financiers and 1 spokesperson. There's simply no point at this stage. I think all has been said till now by the ones who love football. But still, those who promote these projects are now claiming that they want to save football. They want to save football. It's really great that nobody has ever died of shame. In the space of a few months, the so-called Super League has turned into a character in Little Red.
And before we end Spring Global, here is a recap of our top stories. A Federal Capital Territory High Court has issued an order restraining the National Chairman of the Labour Party, Julius Abure, National Secretary Farouk Ibrahim, and 2 others from parading themselves as national officers of the party. Outside Nigeria, Taliban order has barred Afghan women from working for the United Nations. And Israeli police have clashed with Palestinian worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied East Jerusalem. You can follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. My name is Femi Olanikpekun. Thanking you so much for watching. Good evening.